I'm Jessica Peresta, host of the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Kathleen Bjork, and she's written a book, My Mother is Losing Her Memory, and I Am Losing My Mind, Parenting the Aging Parent. She shares her thoughts about caring for her mother who lived with dementia for 6 years. Powerful. So much to learn. Thanks for listening. And by the way, before you go, could you help out the podcast? I got a few ways in which you could. Like 1, tell a friend, share the links. 2, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, how about click on the link on my website homepage where it says buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 or $5 or more to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome.
A lot of it, expect, if you have to take care of someone, resistance to help. You know, here she was an independent woman. Just think about if somebody all of a sudden started making decisions for you. She said, well, I could do it. But a lot of times she couldn't.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
My Mother is Losing Her Memory, and I Am Losing My Mind, Parenting the Aging Parent, is the true story of a mother's journey through dementia that is told through the eyes of her caregiver daughter, Kathleen Bjork. Related with compassion and humor, it details the mother's fight to keep her independence and the family's decisions to keep her safe. Loss of control of her finances as well as her car is met with anger, and a fall which results in a broken hip and rehabilitation confirms that she cannot live alone. A concession to let her return to live in her own home with a caregiver ends in disaster. Our focus is Kathy's book, My Mother is Losing Her Memory, and I Am Losing My Mind, Parenting the Aging Parent. Thanks so much for being here today, Kathy, and say hi to everyone.
Yeah, I'm so glad I was invited, especially I feel like I'm talking more to my peers because I was a teacher, and I admire teachers for going into the profession nowadays. I think there's a lot more challenges for you. So
appreciate that. I know we have, there are a lot of challenges, and speaking of that, let's start with you as a teacher. I mean, what'd you teach, and what'd you like about teaching?
Okay, well, I always wanted to be a teacher ever since second grade, and I love school, and my first job was in second grade, and I was so excited. And it was in a neighborhood where all the students walked to school. It was, back in the 60s. And I taught second grade, and then we moved down to the desert. And my husband got a job down in the desert. And I taught in a school district. The place where I was taught was thermal, and it represented the way it was down here. It was very warm, and these were Hispanic children, so it was a real challenge. But I really enjoyed them, and I liked the parents were very appreciative of their children getting the education. Anyway, then I stopped teaching when my children were small. And then during that time, I took classes to be a resource specialist. And so I went back 8 years later and was a Miller Unruh teacher. And then when that program was eliminated, I went back to second grade. And then after that, I taught sixth grade. I decided to go up in the grades and see what that was like. I taught sixth grade for 3 years and then fifth grade. And then I took classes to be an education specialist. And so I learned a lot about, children with disabilities and having problems. And So then I found out a position opened up for special education. So then I taught special education. That was my last job, was in special education. It was it was a pull-out program. It wasn't a day program. And what I like about teaching is I always wanted to be a teacher. And the teacher that influenced me the most was one that made school interesting and fun. I always like to bring social studies and art into my teaching. And I found, like in fifth grade, we had a tea party because they didn't know much about, the English and their tea parties. And so we had an actual tea party. And then we also, when we talked about the Indians, we went on a dream quest. And then I would find movies that related to what I was teaching, like The Last of the Mohicans. And some of them I had to edit to make them so the children could watch them. But that's what I like to bring that into it.
That's awesome. It's cool to know, if it's what you wanted to do and you start doing it and you liked it. I appreciate you sharing what you like and good stuff, because it's a neat thing working with kids, especially as the light bulb goes on, or they're liking how you're working with them and stuff like that. And it's just
yes. Yeah, and I learned along with them. Like in fifth grade and sixth grade. In sixth grade, we were studying Mesopotamia, and that was really relevant years later when we had the Iraq War. And I always think those children had a little bit more of a background in what was going on.
Makes perfect sense. Most definitely. That's awesome. So when you retired, what were your plans when you realized you're going to retire?
Well, at first I thought I was going to be a tutor and open up my own tutoring, place. And then when I did retire, I signed up for a memoir class. And then I joined a poetry critique group. And so I started writing. And then I also signed up to work as a docent at the Living Desert, which is a zoo. And I took groups of students around. And to be able to do that, it was like a 6 weeks course I had to take on the animals and where they lived and all sorts of information about it. So that was what I like to do. So it just kind of went by the wayside as far as my tutoring, as I kept writing.
Gotcha. So let's use that as background information about a bit about who you are and what you're thinking about. And, so tell us about your mother. Who was she and what was she like through your eyes?
Okay. My mother was a very independent woman. And she cared about us. And this was in the 50s. So my mother stayed at home through most of the time that, I lived at home. And we had one car and one bathroom. And if my mother wanted to use the car, she had to take my dad to work. And I remember going with her, paying the bills. You went to the electric company, you went to the gas company. Nice. So this was the 50s. They talk about the good old days. And I really, I do fondly look back on that. And my mother cared about us. She was not an affectionate person. But she loved us by doing the things. She made us dresses. She helped with projects. She was a very organized person. Her house was spotless. She did work for a time when we were older for a doctor's office. And this is interesting because when she got dementia, that became real important. Wow. She says, "Oh, I know all about it because I worked for a doctor." Right. Anyway, she had lots of friends. She was an only child, so she had lots of friends. I think that only children, it seemed like they tend to have, because they're forced to find children to play with and things. So she loved her grandchildren and would take them on her vacations and things like that when they were, younger, and even when they were older. So that's about it.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's funny what you're talking about going to pay the bills, because now you can pretty much take a picture out with your phone to pay the bills, and that's what you do and stuff like that. And I remember that very well. Like, it's like going to the bank. You had to.
Yeah.
I remember going to the bank with my parents all the time, and with my grandparents as well, because they had to take care of stuff, and you go to the bank, and
Yes.
I miss stuff like that, because they'd hand you, as a kid, they'd have something for you, like a lollipop or something like that. It's like, take me to the bank.
But we're missing that interaction too,
Very much so, because you don't interact with anybody. And it's
Yeah. Yeah.
now to make deposits or to pay those bills. It's interesting. So your mother lived through 6 years of dementia. Could you talk about what you experienced taking care of your mother?
Well, a lot of it, if you have to take care of someone, resistance to help. Here she was an independent woman. Just think about if somebody all of a sudden started making decisions for you. She said, well, I could do it, but a lot of times she couldn't. Like, for instance, the first thing I did was start taking over her bills, because she wouldn't pay them. And then she'd get calls and she'd laugh about, oh, the phone company called me, or the electric company called me. And I say, well, it's really not very funny, because, they might be turned off. So I convinced her to let me take over her bills. And most of them I put on automatic, bill pay, which made it easier. And as she needed more help, she'd tell her friends, my kids are trying to control me, which we were basically, but we had to. And one of the things, one of the big problems is when we had to take her car away. And I think as a Californian, I don't know, back east where they have lots of, trains and things, it might not be as hard. But here in California, if you want to get anywhere, you've got to get in your car. So that's a big, big thing when your car is taken away. So what happened is she drove to my sister's in Yuma, and it was about 300 miles. And she stepped on the accelerator instead of the brake when she pulled into the driveway. Wow. And she ran into the pillars of their carport. And this is when she was 90 years old.
Oh, wow.
And yes. And so we used that as an excuse to take it away. And she never did forgive us. She, she talked about your brother that took my car, because he ended up taking it and giving it to his son to use. Okay, now I was the one basically to take care of her, because I lived about an hour away. My sister and brother lived in Arizona, which is a lot further away. And so what I would do is go to her house a couple of times a month and check on her and make sure she had groceries and things like that. And then after her car was taken away, we tried to get a caregiver. I researched and tried to find the best caregiving place, and the caregiver people came out and talked to us, and I had it all set up. And then they called me later that week and said, we tried to go to take care of your mother like we had planned, but she refused to let us in. So she came to the door, and my mother said, no, I don't need any help. So anyway, so then we eventually put her in assisted living. And when that happened, I still went to see her. And then I tried to have her make decisions, help her figure out on herself she needed it. But sometimes you just couldn't. You just had to do it. And the main thing is to not argue or try to convince. I would usually say, well, because we want to do the best for you, because we love you. And But it's very, very hard. But you just have to keep going and do what you think is best for the person.
Gotcha. Yep. Could you just share a little bit about identifying the symptoms of dementia versus ordinary,
Okay.
aging?
Yeah. What I'm finding out when I speak with groups is uh, a lot of them are worried. It's as I've gotten older, it's not like we're talking about our parents, we're talking about, oh, we're getting close to that age and like I forget words. And that's just kind of normal. And when somebody forgets words occasionally or has to stop and think about directions, or they can remember conversations or things important events that happened recently, and they can carry on with their social activities, then you're normal. Okay. Now, what I tell people, if you know you forgot something, you're okay. If you forget that you forgot, then there's a problem.
Gotcha.
Because these people have memory, they don't remember that they forgot. If they have memory loss, they might not be able to remember what that time, or they get lost in familiar places, like they have trouble getting home. Um, and they can't remember recent events, and it's hard for them to carry on conversations. So those are basically, so it makes a person feel better if you say, well, if you know you forgot, you're okay.
Gotcha. That's good. Good to know right there. So let's talk about how the caring for your mother impacted you. I mean, how did it change what you did in your life?
Well, thank goodness I was retired. And it starts gradually. As I said, I used to go visit her and check on her. And then I could see more and more things were going wrong. As I said, I took over her bills, then her car, and then trying to get the caregiver there. That didn't work out. So it's when she fell and needed care, they moved her down to the desert where I lived. And that's where she went into rehabilitation down here. And then we put her in assisted living. And that's what she resisted. But we did it anyway because I wanted her closer. And I still had to go see her. And a lot of it was decision making that you have to make. Like I researched what the best facilities were, and you have to take her. And I took her out to these different places. And then other things that you have to decide, like what doctors to go to. Um, and then I did have cancer during that period of time. So that was an additional, problem. But I'm the type that I don't dwell on things. If something has to be done, I do it. I know somebody said when they were reading it through, they said, well, you didn't tell all your feelings. And it's like, well, that's not me. I don't think about it. I just do it. And I did consult with my sister. My brother was still working at the time. My sister was retired. So, and my sister came over when she could. And the other thing that I did was I started a blog. Uh, I took a class in blogging, and I started this blog, and that's when my mother's dementia started. And so I started writing about it, and I began hearing from people all over the United States and even the world. And they would say, oh, I can relate to this. My father or my mother is having that problem. And so that's when I decided to make it into a book. And then I joined a critique group, and I shared what I wrote. And that's and then the blog turned into the book, and I wrote my last chapter after she passed away. And then I started doing research on dementia. I wanted to know more about it. And so after she passed, then I kept the blog and I wrote things about it, what I found out, the types of dementia. A lot of people think dementia means Alzheimer's, but it isn't. It's a lot like Parkinson's can bring it on. There's Lewy body dementia, lots of different types. So then I also wrote, besides what I'd learned through journals and through organizations like Alzheimer's Association, I wrote down what I had learned about taking care of someone, how to treat someone with dementia and what you needed to do to get ready for in case somebody needed help, like what a caregiver needs to do.
Gotcha. So as you're talking, I mean, you write this book and you're doing some research and find out a little bit more, and you've connected with people. I'm pretty sure that just as much today, it's such a very much people searching for ideas and thoughts about how to be a caregiver and how to work with their parent who has a different world kind of that they're in than what they were used to growing up with them. Can you talk about your thoughts about trying to find humor in the situations when you're caring for a loved one?
I know some people, when I say that, they think, oh, how can you say, it's funny. And it's not, you're not laughing at it. You're just taking what's happening and realizing, that's the way it is, but it's kind of funny. Like, for instance, the assisted living place called me one night and said, your mother has called 911 and the sheriff is here. What she'd done is she thought she heard somebody in distress down, in another room. And so she called them and they said, well, she's called him a couple of times before. I said,
Oh, wow.
Oh no. So, I mean, you've got to laugh at that. And the other time that was funny is when they called and said, your mother will not go in her room because she says there's a snake in there.
Oh, no.
And my mother's always been afraid of snakes. So I said, okay, I'll come over. So I went over there and I said, Mom, I will try to find the snake. You kind of go along with them. You have to do that a lot of times. So I went in the room and I pretended like I was looking under the bed and everywhere. And I came out and I said, Mom, I looked everywhere. I don't see the snake. I think it went out. And so then she came, then they could bring her in the room.
Right.
That's what I mean by humor.
I gotcha. It makes perfect sense. Something that I wanted to ask that goes along with that is, if you're trying to see the humor in it to help you survive it, can you talk about being being someone who's the caretaker or the person who's trying to help with health care with a loved one who has dementia? I mean, what does it take for you to be able to get through those days, and how do you take care of yourself and trying to work with
that's
your parent?
important. That's important because, well, this is personal. We had neighbors that he had dementia, and his partner was a little bit younger. He's about 10 years younger, and one day we came home and there was the fire truck was there and police, and we thought, well, Mel died, he probably died. And so then the next day we found out that it was a younger one that had died. Gary had died.
Wow.
And that's what a lot of times, if you don't take care of yourself, not saying he didn't take care of himself, but it is stressful sometimes. And if you don't keep time for yourself, don't totally be involved with that person, that has dementia. So it's important. So the other thing is, I just thought sometimes people, when somebody is sick or somebody is a lot older, they kind of talk down to them. And I've heard some people like Eli in a store sometimes, they'll call you honey or something like that. And I just, it bothers me. Anyway, what you can, interacting, you just treat them with dignity and like you normally would. Don't talk down to them. And then include them in conversations. Like, don't say, well, they wouldn't understand. Include them. You can say things and then they will react. Just make them feel like they're part of it. And what you can do is steer a conversation to something they can relate to. And like the past, I talked with my mother about relatives she's had in the past that I never heard about before. Her aunts and uncles. And I got a lot of the family gossip from way back. Anyway, then says to be aware of when they need help and let them try to do it themselves, but then, assist them when you can. And this one I've said before is don't argue or reason with them. Just picture like a 3-year-old. Would you reason with a 3-year-old? No. You can't reason with them. Just kind of let it go. And be an advocate. It's really important to be an advocate. Like my mother was feeling, well, this one time I kept seeing her, she was kind of down and she wasn't really very social. She would, kind of drab. And anyway, what I found out is the doctor had given her medicine that is given to people to try to get them calmed down, like people that have a mental illness. And so I talked to the nurse there at the assisted living, and they ended up taking her off the medication. So you've really got to be an advocate. And like for her clothes, I mean, some places you got to watch and make sure. I put name tags on all her clothes, and because sometimes they get mixed up. And then for money, it's really important to keep track of the money. What you need to do is ahead of time, you need to try to get, if they're getting to the age where they might have problems, or if you're getting that age, you should do it with your children. Make a trust so it's easier. You don't have to go through probate. Get a power of attorney. Get a HIPAA where you can get information about their health. And then get everything together, like the titles of different properties they would own, the title to the car or whatever. Getting these reports and getting these all together makes it a lot easier, because when my mother, I wanted to consolidate all her bank accounts. So I went to one of the banks and I told her this is what I was going to do. And she came in with me and I said, we want to withdraw this money from, I guess she had savings and something else. Anyway, I said, my mother wants to take the money out, and because we're going to consolidate her bank accounts. And then the woman would look at my mother and says, is this what you want to do? My mother would say no. So then we'd have to start all over again. Wow. Every time she'd ask my mother, because I didn't have that power of attorney yet. And so it's a good example of what to do. I think the other thing is what I've also mentioned is deal with the person the way they are now. Don't think about the way they used to be. And just deal with them. This is the chapter of their life that they're going through this, and deal with them just this way. And so I think that's it.
That's powerful. That's powerful advice.
Yes.
Very important advice. And you mentioned this before, that Alzheimer's and dementia are not the same. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, Alzheimer's is it's like the fastest growing disease in America today, and sixth leading cause of death in America. Why do you think that's so?
Yes. We are living longer is basically the short answer, but they're finding more cures for things. And so we are getting older. And they say that, because some of the things that we had before would result in death. And so we have more of a senior population. And they say it's not a normal part of the aging process, but the main risk factor is getting older. I'm thinking, this is what I always tell people to go to the experts. But my thought is that, you're kind of, as you get older, your body is breaking down, and that's probably the last part that's, being affected. And yes, but they are working on it so much. So many scientists are trying to find the cure. And this is why I think people always thought that we'd find the answer and dementia would be eliminated. But it's not that easy. And they are finding different ways to stop it. But it's usually at the very beginning stages.
Gotcha. So one of the things that you mentioned is something called the 6 pillars of dementia prevention. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, actually, it's for dementia, it would be for a good life. It's all the things that they talk about that you should have in your life to keep it balanced. What you need is exercise and being around other people. I think about where you talk about like the couch potato, the person that just sits at home and doesn't do anything and doesn't interact with other people. That's not healthy. And a good diet, mental stimulation. That's why they have those puzzles in the paper now, which I do every morning. Anyway, that mental stimulation, whether you're reading or a hobby, a lot of ways to keep your mind alert, and good sleep, and stress management. It's, you will have stress. It's not saying, you're never going to have it, but think of ways to get over it, like meditation or whatever, because they say stress has an effect on your nerve cells, and it could have an effect on your brain cells. So those are things that for anybody, it is good to be able to do, to have that balance.
Gotcha. I appreciate you talking about that. I know you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I kind of wanted to talk just a little bit as we're coming towards a close. So why'd you write the book? I mean, who's its main audience? Who are you trying to get the attention of?
I think anyone that wants to know more about dementia, but it's probably more of people in the middle, midlife, where they're thinking about, their parents. And, but I think anyone could profit from reading it, because it gives you an idea. Instead of a list of symptoms, it will give you what it's actually like to go through dementia, what a person was like. And my mother had the mild cognitive type at first, and then it got worse. A lot of times people think, oh, dementia, they just become like catatonic and they can't recognize people. My mother could recognize people. And they're different types, but I think this gives a good idea of like a day-to-day, what it's like. And this is why and then when I did my blog that talks about the types of dementia and how it gives it like the scientific breakdown of what it's like. And then also some of my, what I've learned. And I think anybody would profit from knowing that.
Thanks so much. I mean, it's a topic that just, it touches so many different families, and it's so important that you have written this book and shared your thoughts, and it's greatly appreciated. Kathy, as we're finishing up, where can our listeners find additional information, get a copy of your book, My Mother is Losing Her Memory and I Am Losing My Mind, Parenting the Aging Parent?
Okay, it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and books.org. And that's for small book companies is the one that you can get on the internet. And then also I have a blog, kathybjork.com, which, as I've been talking about, would answer a lot of questions about it.
Awesome. So I'll remind everybody of that information. It'll be in my show notes, and I appreciate it. And your blog is awesome. It's got a lot of great thoughts in there, and so make sure that
Thank you.
Everyone needs to make sure they go there too. Last question for you, and you kind of gave us a little hint about this at the beginning, so we're back to that topic, which is, I like to ask my guests this question, which is, do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? And if so, who was it, and what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Okay, well, the one that had the most influence was my second grade teacher, because she, as I said, she made learning fun. We studied in second grade, you studied about the community, and we built a whole town. She got these big like refrigerator boxes, and we made like a post office and a fire department and different things that I remember that. And the teachers, I remember the ones that read to us. I think that was my sixth grade teacher, read books to us every day. And a lot of times they think, well, they're older, you don't need to do that. But she did, and that made an impression on me. Most of my teachers did have an influence, but the second grade was the most.
Awesome. Love it. I love it. Kathy, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts about caring for an aging parent. It's been a pleasure to learn from you about your book, My Mother is Losing Her Memory and I Am Losing My Mind, Parenting the Aging Parent. Much needed information, powerful, and I'm wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.